Borderlands 3 could be a complete hit or miss, and here's why. The one thing that's been on my mind ever since they announced Borderlands 3 was whether or not it can follow up the success of Borderlands 2. Not even because Borderlands 2 is a really well established game already, but considering the game when it came out received stellar reviews. It got a 9 out of 10 from IGN, a 10 out of 10 from Steam, and a 90% rating on PC Gamer, and it was praised as an even more satisfying and tactically interesting shooter. It was loved by everyone because it was a huge step up from Borderlands 1. And my initial worry when they first announced Borderlands 3 was the fact that Borderlands 2 was so good. It was such an amazing game. It's the best Borderlands has been. And it's been out for 7 years by the time Borderlands 3 comes out. So fans of the series have been playing Borderlands 2 for the last 7 years. It's had a lot of support, a lot of updates from Gearbox. They even released a new DLC for Borderlands 2 7 years later, the Commander Lilith and Fight for Sanctuary DLC. It's pretty decent, it's nothing special, but the fact they're releasing content for this game 7 years after the release of the game to then bridge the gap between Borderlands 2 and 3, that's dedication. And that's the sort of stuff that I like to see in the video game industry, where a company is dedicated to their game and also dedicated to bringing their fans these experiences that they won't forget. Fans have just been playing Borderlands 2 and it's built up a huge following on all of the platforms, especially PC, and players have become very used to Borderlands 2, the way it plays, the way the physics work, the way the gunplay works, the way the navigation works. Now, I'm not saying that these features will be completely different in Borderlands 3, because most likely they're taking a lot of inspiration from what they knew fans loved in Borderlands 2 and simply reworking it so it works better or is slightly different to what fans are used to. One of the main downfalls of sequels to huge franchises like this, like stuff like Halo, Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy, all of these games that have had a long time to build up hype for the next game in the franchise. The problem with these games is they build up such an amount of hype and fans build up these amazing ideas in their head of what the next game could be. So when the actual game comes out, it's nowhere near what they were expecting for all of these years. So people are really expecting Borderlands 3 to, without a doubt, at the very least, top Borderlands 2. I mean, it's the sequel, it's got to be better, right? This isn't always the case. There's been so many games that have been released that were almost definitely on track to being better than the last game released in the series, and yet for some reason, even with all this manpower, and for some reason with all of these years of effort put into developing these games, it's almost like there's no way that these new games can live up to the legacy that the previous game in the series left behind. And I think that's the problem of many franchises nowadays that wait a long time in between releasing the next title, and this is a problem that Borderlands 3 could run into. Now, I'm not saying rush all your games out just so you don't come across this problem, because that's definitely not what you should do at all. It's more of a fault of the fans ourselves thinking that this next game could be so much better than what we've got already, when that's not necessarily always the case. And I'm certainly not saying this is a definite with the case in Borderlands 3, because from what I've seen in the trailers, from what I've seen from the gameplay that I've watched on YouTube, it has the potential to be an amazing game. The prospect of a new Borderlands game with a brand new story, brand new possibilities, new capabilities, new engine, new gameplay techniques, new characters, all of these things, that's the premise for a fucking amazing game. That was the exact same premise that Borderlands 2 had, and look how successful that was. So taking the premise from Borderlands 2 and then putting it onto current gen consoles of all of this new technology, all this new hardware and software to be working with, this new game could be fucking amazing. But developers do find a way to get sort of lost halfway through development and sort of forget why they were creating these games in the first place. It can go sort of down the route of marketing it in a certain way so it appeals to various different target audiences that like different types of games, and sort of forgetting about your main target audience, which at the end of the day should be the fans. The main target audience for all developers should always be the fans of your franchise, or else you're doing it wrong and you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I get that. I mean, Gearbox is a company at the end of the day, and they have to make some form of profit. So of course they're going to be thinking about the different business aspects of the game and how it could do well, and how certain features being added could mean it's more appealing to different target audiences. But I don't want that to take away from what this game could be. There's certain things that they add into games these days just to sort of fit with trends so they don't get completely forgotten, even though the one way of not getting forgotten is by just genuinely making a good game. The way I see it is that Borderlands has always been the original looter shooter franchise on all major consoles and even on PC as well. And there have been many games that try and emulate the Borderlands formula since then. And I still think that Borderlands 3 will most likely blow the clone games out of the water, stuff like The Division and Destiny. They're still not going to be on the same level as Borderlands 3. I think that simply Borderlands 3 will be better than these other games because it's Borderlands, because Gearbox know the formula, they know what looter shooter games need, they know the way to build a community, and if they can pull this off, then it will definitely be better than games like Destiny, more successful than games like Destiny, because they're doing it in a much better way. I mean, remember, it's been 7 years since the last Borderlands game came out. Borderlands 2, which pretty much was the last Borderlands game, let's be honest, because the pre-sequel was shit. Borderlands 2 was the last major Borderlands title, and that came out 2 years before Destiny 1. So watch them come back with Borderlands 3 and completely blow all of the clone games out of the water. So Destiny is going to suffer from the impact that Borderlands 3 is going to have, and so is stuff like The Division and other games in that similar vein. I think this could definitely be something that happens because Borderlands is just that refined, and Borderlands is pretty much the granddaddy of looter shooter games. Now, I would have mentioned Anthem because that's another looter shooter-esque video game, multiplayer online MMO sort of game that's come out recently that also tries to emulate the sort of looter Borderlands-esque style. But Anthem is like fucking, it died before it even came out. Like, it was destined to be a bad game. And I would say that, yeah, Borderlands would affect the development of this game going forward, but what fucking development does Anthem actually have? It's a pile of shit. Anyway, from what I've seen of Borderlands, it looks beautiful from a technical standpoint, I'm not even gonna lie. Going back recently and playing Borderlands 2 again, I realised how well these games actually hold up from a graphical standpoint. They are absolutely beautiful because cel shading graphics and the cel shaded art style is completely fucking timeless, because there's no way that it can really look any worse because it already is very simplistic. And Borderlands 3 takes it this next step further. It's got a whole variety of shaders and lighting and various different texture upgrades, so that it just all looks completely better. Everything about the visual side of Borderlands 3, comparing it to Borderlands 2, yeah, it all looks completely amazing. They've kept the art style, you know, half the stuff that is in Borderlands 3 I could imagine being taken directly from Borderlands 2, but it all looks so crisp and nice, and it runs so smoothly. So it's really nice to see that there's no issues regarding optimization and no issues regarding the graphics looking maybe a little bit shit. Borderlands is a very vibrant world, and to be able to convey how vibrant this universe is, you have to use the hardware that you've got. You have to make the game look beautiful, and the various playable environments that we've seen in the trailers look absolutely amazing. So I'm really happy to see that, because Borderlands has always been a game series that I thought looked pretty nice, because it is timeless. Again, it's one of those series where it's timeless due to the art style. So going back and playing Borderlands 2, seeing how nice that looked, and then seeing how even better Borderlands 3 looks in the various gameplay that we've seen, you know, it does look great, so I'm happy to see that. Obviously, I haven't played Borderlands 3, I haven't gone to any events where you can play it. I've just seen gameplay from the internet, and from what I've seen, the gameplay looks responsive, especially the gunplay. It looks incredibly responsive, but it looks way more tame than previous games. Now, I don't know if this is because of the class that the person was playing, or they weren't utilizing all of their abilities, but the gameplay definitely looks more like a traditional FPS opposed to what previous Borderlands games have been. I noticed that the physics and the way the character moves and the way they flow during gunplay, it's a lot more floaty and a lot more almost freeform in a way in Borderlands 2, but from what I've seen the gameplay in Borderlands 3, it almost looks like the gunplay is sort of more rigid and more tame than in previous games, as if they're going for a more traditional FPS seeming gameplay, which I personally don't like. I really enjoyed the sort of jumping around and flying about that was done in Borderlands 2, depending on your playstyle, and I did a lot of that in Borderlands 2, but in Borderlands 3, it kind of looks more like the gunplay is based on simply just shooting enemies, not using any abilities, and just kind of being just a normal first-person shooter-esque game, and I don't really like that. Obviously, I'm sure as we get further into the game, when we play it, the there will be so much more that we can do as a player, and there'll be so much more we can utilize. But so far, the base gunplay looks incredibly static in a way, and that's just based off of what I can see on the internet. Obviously, that's not me playing it. When I actually get the game and get my hands on it, maybe I'll actually be able to understand that the gunplay is different to what it seems like when you just watch it on the internet. But from what I've seen, it looks rigid. That's all I'm gonna say. It looks quite rigid. If you cast your mind back to the story mode of Borderlands 2, you'll remember a character called Tiny Tina, and she was a very cringeworthy character. Borderlands games in previous years have had very cringeworthy characters, I'm not gonna lie. Comedy doesn't always go through well, and obviously comedy is a completely subjective thing, so things that I will find funny, characters that I will find funny or entertaining, other people won't, and vice versa. And now I've noticed a huge influx of characters that are like Tiny Tina, in the sense that they are so utterly cringy. In an attempt to make characters that are unique and quirky and funny and relatable to the player, developers end up creating characters that are so clearly awfully cringeworthy with the things they say, the way they look, the way their voices are, the way the voice acting is done. And I've noticed that Borderlands 3 has an influx of these flamboyant side characters. I watched some gameplay where you're trying to find your way into a Malawan vault to get these weapons, and you come across this side character, this British side character. I forgot the woman's name, but just the stuff she says and the jokes she makes and the one-liners she has are all just very cringeworthy. It's almost like there's been a few developers sitting in this board meeting and being like, right, you know, how can we overhaul the characters that are going to be in Borderlands, and just coming up with these generally really cringeworthy characters that are almost too progressive, too friendly, too happy, and the stuff they say is very almost unoffensive in a way, because Borderlands has always had sort of quite offensive humor, and that's always something that I've thought was quite funny about Borderlands. But it's almost like some of the characters in Borderlands 3 that they've almost made an effort to make them more unoffensive and more progressive and more friendly to certain groups that might be easily offended by some of the comedy used in the game. And of course, I'm by no means saying that Gearbox and 2K have a political agenda with this. You know, they're not Ubisoft where they put politics in all their fucking games. But it just seems like the characters aren't really doing it for me personally, from what I've seen. Now, of course, there's going to be returning characters in Borderlands 3, as in the original Vault Hunters from 1, and then obviously the group of Vault Hunters in Borderlands 2, and there'll obviously be other characters from both Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2 coming back. But there's going to be new characters introduced, and from what I've seen from the new characters, they simply aren't doing it for me in terms of the way they interact with the player and the way the comedy is set out, because a lot of characters are quite funny in Borderlands. That's what a lot of the main and side characters are, but it's almost like they have these really cringeworthy one-liners and personality traits that just I don't find it very funny personally. The same goes for the main Vault Hunters in Borderlands 3 as well. They're done a lot better. I'm going to admit they're done a lot better than the characters, like the annoying side characters. But all the characters in Borderlands 3, all the new characters anyway, do seem quite cringeworthy, very cringeworthy in a lot of stuff that they say, which is disappointing, but I'm kind of waiting to see more of the game to make a full judgment on that. I think one huge big fuck you from Gearbox and 2K was the fact that instead of putting Borderlands 3 on Steam, the game will now be on the Epic Games launcher. I think that's a big, massive fuck you to the fans that have been playing Borderlands games on PC since Borderlands 1. Like, I get that it's just the difference of a launcher, but it's in terms of loyalty to the fans, they should have chose to put it on Steam, because the Epic Games launcher is the worst game launcher on PC. It's awful. It's got a terrible user interface. I can't use it, which is why I tend to use Steam. I would even rather the fucking game be on Origin if it had to, or GOG. You know, all these strange launchers. Epic Games launcher is the worst one they could have picked. They could have even put it on the Blizzard launcher. Like, why'd they pick the fucking Epic Games launcher, the worst one out there? You know, and I really don't want to use it. So I'm probably just gonna torrent the game and then fucking put it on Steam myself instead. There you go. In all seriousness though, I don't understand, like how much money did Epic Games have to pay them to put it on this terrible launcher. Like, I'm at a loss. I'm at a fucking loss. Anyway, all in all, Borderlands 3 could be a fantastic game. Going back and replaying Borderlands 2 recently was a really great experience, and it reminded me how fantastic of a franchise Borderlands actually is. And if Borderlands 3 can live up to the hype of Borderlands 2 after how great of a game that was, and if it can get everything right and just be another great looter shooter experience, then I'm sure Borderlands will prosper into the future, and there'll be many DLCs, and the fan base will sort of come back, and the hype will be back there again after the 7 years that we haven't had a main title of a Borderlands game. But it could also go the opposite way. You know, with the current video game industry and all the practices present in this industry that can be considered slightly evil, slightly shifty, slightly shady, you know, Gearbox, they could succumb to this consumerist way of looking at video games and seeing video games as a service, especially with a huge multiplayer name like Borderlands. They could do some really fucked up shit with it and just fuck people over. You know, we will have to see when the game is released if it's good or not, how the gunplay is, what the environments are like, what the side quests are like, and when the game comes out, I will do some form of review on it if I can get round to it. But until then, we're just going to have to look at Borderlands 3 and how it could be a huge hit or miss.